This is my lion's roar.
There you go.
That's what it is, right? A lion's roar.
Yeah,
I would just say we got to hang in there. You know, we got to all roar together. Soon enough, we're going to be in a different place. And hopefully, even though we've all been disconnected, we'll be more connected than ever. We can get some of these things done.
What's up, everybody? Lance Bachmann here on the Lion's Den. Today, we have Philadelphia's District Attorney, Larry Krasner. Yes, the man himself. He has been a trendsetter for the country. He has done a lot of things that people agree with and a lot of things people disagree with, but no one can say that Larry's not doing it his way, and he's going to try and make Philadelphia a better place for all he truly believes. Larry, so much for being on the Den. I really do appreciate it.
Hey, Lance, it's great to see you again, and I'm happy to be here.
So we've gotten to know each other over the years. You know, when you were running the election, when you're running for DA, I got to meet you, got to know you. I truly believe there's always two sides to both stories, right, Larry, before we start this interview. And I said, as I got to know you, I don't think you're a malice man. I don't think there's any, you're very controversial. I think we both agree to that, right? I mean, very controversial. But I know you, I don't believe it comes from a bad spot, the things you're doing and what you're saying. Would you agree to that?
I would agree that I am trying to do what I think is right. One expression I hear a lot when I'm out in the community is that you are trying to be fair. And for some reason, I hear that expression over and over. You know, what really intrigues me about that is the word trying, which I hear over and over. And the only conclusion I can draw is that you have people in Philly whose notion of a prosecutor is that they're not even trying to be fair. So we know that we don't get everything right. We know we don't get everything wrong, but we really are trying to be fair. And for a lot of people, that represents change. And for a lot of people, change can be scary. For other people, it's exciting. But I can tell you, we're certainly trying to come from a place of making things better.
What have you accomplished during your first term, in your opinion, and why you?
So I think what we have accomplished, and I don't really view it as being around me, I really view this as a national movement of people, a grassroots movement, something coming from the people that, of course, is also coming from the people in Philly, because you don't get much more of a grassroots town than Philly. I mean, this is a working class town. It's the poorest of the 10 largest towns. We got our elbows up. We love each other. We hug each other and we fight each other. It's kind of what it is. So I honestly believe that this all comes from a movement. I was a political unknown when this started, really didn't have any intention of ever being a politician until I saw some stuff in the criminal justice system that I thought had gone sideways. So what are our accomplishments? I think the biggest one is probably what I hear over and over is that there is an increase in the trust between communities and the officers who serve those communities. And that's not just a nice fluffy thing. That's a really important thing, because when people in the community trust police, then they're going to give information about a shooting that's about to go down, which maybe you can prevent, or they're going to give information about, you know, a terrible rape that occurred at a bus stop around the corner, because they feel like they can engage with the prosecutor's office and with police who are going to be fair and they're going to be accountable. And they're not just going to try to jack you up for having contact with them. So in my mind, we're on a long road to restore trust between police, prosecutors, and the communities they serve, but it's absolutely essential. And it is, among other things, the key to public safety.
It seems like there's a lot of friction between right now, the police and the community right now. Is that accurate? Because I've seen you and the FOP have some differences, some words publicly. So you're saying the trust is actually getting better between the community and the police, where it looks like from the outside, me just sitting there, I thought it was actually kind of deteriorating. Is that not? Or?
No, I would respectfully disagree on that. So it's very important to remember the difference between the FOP, which is the police union, and the head of that union is a frequent critic. It's important to remember the difference between them. That's a union. And the Philadelphia Police Department, which is 6,300 active officers. The person in charge of the Philadelphia Police Department is Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw. Danielle Outlaw is on my speed dial right here. She and I talk frequently, exchange information frequently, are very supportive of each other, because I believe that she wants things to get better with the police department, just as I want my office, my prosecutor's office, and policing and the state to get better. I think we're really on the same page. Doesn't mean we agree about everything, but you will, if you look, you'll see we're not spending all our time throwing each other under the bus. And that was also true of Richard Ross before her. We had, I thought, an excellent relationship. The FOP is a different thing, you know, and I'll be blunt and I'll be direct, because that's what I like to do. Every police officer, whether they like the leadership of the FOP or not, is required to be a member of this union. And the union itself is run mostly by its retired members. And I say that not to be disrespectful of its retired members, but if you have, let's just say 19,000 retired members, 6,000 active police officers, and it's time to vote on the leadership of the union, and it turns out that overwhelmingly your retired members have a more, how should I put it, historic viewpoint of policing. Let's just say they came up under Frank Rizzo, or they admire Frank Rizzo, or they think, what do you used to say? Scapo o capo, break the head. They think that's the way you should do things. And you got 19,000 votes who think you should break the head. And you got 6,000 people who actually have to be on the street in modern times dealing with policing. And a hell of a lot of them don't think that, right? So what you really get from the FOP, it's leadership at least, and not necessarily the rank and file at all, is you get the voice of the past. And what you're getting within the police department is a much more modern, much more progressive view of how there should be policing and the relationship between police and community. So that's why I say, I'm not going to get real political about this, but there is no question that the leadership of the FOP has been 100% white, male, Republican, and, endorsed Donald Trump. On the other hand, the Black Officers Association in Philadelphia, the Guardians, took a very different position on who should be the president of the United States last time, and they're going to do it again this time, right? So we have to really be careful not to stereotype police any more than we stereotype any other group. And we have to be careful to recognize that there are real differences between a retired generation of police who are controlling the FOP and a current generation of police who've grown up with things like an opioid epidemic and maybe have a different view of how we should deal with addiction and how we should deal with juveniles and whether they all need to be arrested for everything all the time, right? I'm here to work with all the good, hardworking, decent cops we got in Philly. We got a ton of them. But I'm not here to live in a world where I'm supposed to pretend that the ones who are brutal or corrupt or racist aren't there. The law has to apply to everybody. It has to apply to everybody all the time. And when the FOP says it shouldn't, I disagree.
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, everyone has to do the right thing. I mean, the one thing I do know, and I have no problem saying, hey, listen, I got in trouble when I was a juvenile. I've never hidden that from the day when I met you. I think the system is broke, has a lot of problems. I've told you that years ago. I've never hide. I'm a very in the middle person. But I do know one thing. 98% of cops out there are good people. They take that job to save people's lives. They want to – I've seen so much good. And I could be – I've been, in trouble. I've met bad cops and bully cops, but out of 98% of them, they're good. Do you think maybe that some cops are being treated unfairly right now? Because I have the utmost respect for the police, and I think the 2% that are total jerks, the problem with FOP is they protect them and don't just get rid of them. They should be gone right away. If someone does something bad in my organization, they're walked out the door. Right. Is that kind of what you're thinking, or do you think there's more of a problem than that? I'm just kind of curious.
So, I in general, I totally agree with what you're saying. In general, I believe that there are a ton of great cops and they take the job for all the right reasons and they don't want to be doing things the wrong way, right? The FOP, I mean, look, I am a pro-union guy. I respect unions. I understand that part of their job is to defend you when you get in trouble. But there's limits. There are limits. When you got, an officer running around with Nazi tattoos on his arms, and you got 106 reasons why that's okay, why it's not an issue at all, you're saying something about how you think government should interact with society. When you have police officers who voluntarily go on the internet with no security settings and say all kinds of things, to the effect of it's okay to beat women, all Muslims should die, racist things, make jokes about how they want to take their trucks and drive through crowds of protesters. When you have that kind of stuff going on, there has to be some understanding that as a police officer, holding yourself out there who is paid by the people, who serves the people, whose power comes from the people, that has to be under control. So I think some of this is at the level of individuals, as with any group. And I'm talking to you as a DA whose predecessor, Seth Williams, went to jail. All right. So I am somebody who believes that even the top of the food chain got to be responsible for what you do, and you got to pay the price for what you do. But some of it exists at the level of policy, where you have good officers who are in a system that is not as good as it could be, and things have to be fixed. You know, illegal stop and frisk is an example of that, especially in its worst manifestations. When you are an African-American 16-year-old kid who goes to the same bus stop on the way back from school every day and is really up to doing nothing wrong, and you get pushed up against a wall and you have people sticking their hands down your pants and grabbing your junk while you're up against the wall 3 or 4 times, guess what? You're not going to want to be a cop. Maybe you did before. You're not going to be as willing to speak to police. Maybe you were before. So there is an issue with a small number of individuals who are just, you know, rotten people, like there is with lawyers, like there is with doctors. But there's also an issue with the system and how we need to change certain policies so that we can reconnect policing and prosecution, because prosecutors have made a bunch of terrible mistakes themselves with the community.
I mean, this might sound too unrealistic. Why not just say to Jim and McNesby and say, Jim, why don't we sit down, talk? Most of the complaints from the police happen to the same top 1 to 3% officers or repeat offenders, from what I understand, correct? It's the same officers getting the complaints filed against them. Why not say, Jim, we're going to get rid of these officers and we're going to clean the force up and set the tone and work together and say, they're gone. They're bad officers.
I mean, I have said it. No, not at all. I have said it. I will say it. I have agreed with that my whole life. I mean, I spent 25 years not only going to court on criminal matters to defend people, but I was one of the few attorneys in town who would sue police when they were brutal or corrupt or racist or they framed somebody, something like that. And I did that because the DA's office didn't do it and the U.S. Attorney's office didn't do it. They were basically looking the other way all the time when there was some kind of police misconduct. So in a sense, I've been in this game not just the last few years as a prosecutor, but I've been in this game all the way back to about 1990 in terms of trying to make sure that police are as good as they should be. You know, part of this, in my mind, comes from having a lot of military, both on my side of the family and on my wife's side of the family. Her dad was career military pilot, 25 years in, relatively high-ranking guy, flew in 2 wars. I can name my dad and a couple uncles right now who all volunteered, served in World War II. Some of them were really, really, really in harm's way. Military funerals, the whole deal. Like when you wear a uniform, you come correct. It's that simple. It's that simple. Equality in application of the law applies to all of us. It should apply to the last DA who went to jail. It should apply to me, but it should also apply to people who wear the uniform. That's just what it is.
Do you feel bad? Because I know this. I'm a father of 4 children. You know that, right? You know my one son wanted to be a cop for the longest time, and I have the utmost respect for cops, and I begged him not to, right? I said, please do not become a police officer to my son Andrew, because I see cops just getting pounded. I have so many friends that are cops, right? And they're black and white, and they're almost like, I did nothing wrong and I'm being pounded. I don't turn the TV on in my house right now because police are being bashed every day. Do you feel bad for the good cops out there right now, just totally probably distraught? Because cops should be looked at, in my opinion, as heroes, right? No different than the military, the people that protect us. I know there is a problem with the 2-3%, but do you think everyone's getting just machine gunned down right now and we got to have separation?
I think we have a society that and we have a psychology that finds it easier to deal in stereotypes, right? So, somebody might look at your history and they might say, well, here's a guy who got in trouble with the law. We know what he's going to be when he grows up. We know where this goes. He's going to be smashing whiskey bottles in the faces of guys in bars. That's where he's going to be. Well, that's not where you are. You're sitting in a pretty good spot. You've been able to achieve a hell of a lot in your life. Your kids love you. One of them wants to be a cop and you're saying no because he listens to you, right? You got some things going on. But that gets to the core of the issue. What's broken about the system is that it's based on the belief that people are either all good or all bad. And that people in certain groups are all the same. So if you've had a bad experience with a police officer, and many people have, they may start to see them as a stereotype. All these cops are mean, all of them are bullies, all of them are racist. And that's not true. There's a ton of great cops. The hard part is to do individual justice and be able to say, well, even if you were a thing in the past, that doesn't mean it determines who you are now. And even if some of the people who work with you are a thing, that doesn't define who you are. We have to recognize that people change over time, that organizations and cities and politics, they all change over time. And everyone we deal with is an individual. I mean, people talk about, just for example, protesters versus police. Really? Here's the news. The reason that we have an African-American woman police commissioner is protest. The reason we have any African-American police officers is protest. The reason we have any women who are police officers is protest. In what sense are these groups against each other? If we look at it a little bit more deeply, we look at the individuals, what we're speaking about is not a stereotypical cop who is, some pink-faced white guy with a crew cut clobbering a black person. And when we look at, people in the community, they're all completely different too. We have to be willing to see everybody's humanity and understand that there's just a ton of great people in almost any field. It's usually the thinkers who get the attention.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. I guess let's talk about that. We said the protesters, a hot topic's been right now, the protesters, some of it turned into looting. I mean, it just did. I mean, that's the only word I could think of when you're breaking windows, stealing. What's your thoughts on that? Why do you think there's a separation between the protesters and the rioters or looters, or whatever you want to call them? Or do you think it's, hey, 80%, 90% of people were truly protesting and a 10% ruined it for the protest? Or do you think that, I mean, honestly, do you think it was okay that what they did by breaking into the stores and stealing stuff? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
So, you're not going to find a photograph of Martin Luther King coming out of a broken storefront window with a bunch of T-shirts under his arm, right? In my mind, in my lifetime, as someone who's almost 60 years of age, who grew up watching the civil rights movement on television, King wore a suit almost all the time. And if he didn't wear a suit, then he was wearing overalls for a reason, like it was the Poor People's Campaign. He was extremely conscious of the difference between nonviolent protest, expressions of free speech, and also the necessity as a black man at that time, and maybe even now, of being overdressed, of being extremely respectable. He was extremely cognizant of that, and it was strategic, but it was also philosophical because it was based on the notion of how you can change society non-violently. That's a different image than people who are going into stores. So, I think, once again, it gets blurred. Once again, we're kind of talking about stereotypes. If you look at the videos of people smashing in windows on Walnut and Chestnut Street, and it did happen in many other places in the city, and they're coming in and out, you don't see them dropping Black Lives Matter signs. You don't see them, with few exceptions, wearing T-shirts that are saying Black Lives Matter. You see people going in there and stealing. That's basically what you see. So to me, these are different things. And we have to be willing to look at all the nuances, right? It's a crime to commit a burglary. It's a crime to commit a criminal trespass. It's a crime to steal. That's not free speech being expressed. That is different than that. But it's also not even necessarily the same people. It seems overwhelmingly that some people were on the street to express themselves out of rage, out of upset over the horrifying homicide of George Floyd and everything it represents about our history. And then there were some other people swept up in the moment who committed crimes. And then there were some other people who are just lifelong criminals who committed crimes. I mean, one of the things that happened during this period was the burglary of a gun store. Correct. There's actually happened more than once. There's a burglary of a gun store by, we believe, at least 6 people. One of them got shot to death by the store owner, but there were 2 cars and there were 4 people going in there so they could take out hundreds of guns. That is just plain old opportunistic crime. It's the kind of opportunistic crime that could have put a ton of guns on the street when we're in the middle of a shooting spike and we're in the middle of a homicide spike. That stuff is very, very different than what we're talking about when we speak of peaceful protest.
Not to cut you off, you were getting campaigned to press charges on that gun owner. They were campaigning you on the street. People were saying that shooting was unjustified. I mean, to me, that seems pretty, people were campaigning you to press charges. I was actually proud to hear you say he had the right to protect himself.
Well, let me just explain that I have the wonderful advantage that when there's a video, I see it. When there's photographs, I get them. I get a lot of that stuff before the public does. And in criminal justice, everything is very, very fact specific, right? But I know the facts on that situation. And like I said, I'm not going to see the world in stereotypes. We have to look at the individual. We have to see what the law says and what the fact says, and we have to follow that. So there's a lot of nuance here. Of course, it is a crime to steal stuff, to break windows. Of course, it is a crime to light things on fire. But even within that group, you have to look at this fact, right? So there are charges against over 500 people for burglary and criminal trespass during about a 10-day period, which was when most of the unrest really occurred. How many of those people have absolutely no prior record? and are between the ages of 18 and 25. How many of those people are people we would ordinarily have offered some kind of diversion where they would be held accountable, they'd be supervised for a while, they would have to pay their restitution, but they would not get a permanent criminal record and therefore become incapable of participating in the economy. You know, we have to look at that too. On the other hand, maybe you got somebody going into that shop who just got out of a sentence of 5 to 10 years in state prison for an armed robbery, and 2 weeks out, he's jumping in to steal. Those are different people. We have to be willing to do individual justice and to see what is happening to those individuals. And we also really have to hear the voice of the community, the voice of victims. It's a big deal to a store owner to be shut down, not just from a pandemic, but to be shut down by this kind of an invasion of your business. It's a big deal to an elderly, elderly person, elderly woman who lives in a community and your pharmacy is shut down so you can't walk to get your medicine anymore. Those are big deals. And we're gonna have to balance it. We're gonna have to look at the approximately 1,000 people we have charges against during that period, and we're gonna have to do it right. So for that reason, we have over 40 attorneys who are digging in deep on these cases. We're getting all the video, we're getting all the facts. We're gonna try to separate the wheat from the chaff and do justice by everybody, including all the, the store owners, the victims of the situation.
Larry, we're going to get into a few cool things here. I got to know you and I'm glad, but do you think politics is coming into play around the country on who gets charged and who doesn't get charged? I'm just kind of curious your thought on that. I'm going to give you my example why. After.
Okay. All right. I think it always has. I think one of the worst things about prosecution in the United States has been, and this is partly because prosecutors run for office, but worse yet, it's because people often become chief prosecutors locally so they can run for higher office. And I'll give you an example. So Ed Rendell, 33 years old, I think. He became DA, and then he became mayor, and then he became governor, and then he became close friends with Bill Clinton. He's still a very important voice in the Democratic Party. Arlen Specter, he was DA in Philly when he was about 35 years of age. And he became a United States Senator who almost controlled access to the United States Supreme Court. This is typical. The resume of a lot of politicians who rise to a very high level, governor, US Senator, president, whatever it is, the resume often includes being a prosecutor. And the sad part about that is that the job is to seek justice. And the job is to take the heat when what you're doing is unpopular. But if all you're going to do is try to be popular because your ambition is driving you to higher office, and it's popular to pick on Black people, and it's popular to pick on people who have mental illness, and I could go on, and it's popular to pick on poor people. And whenever someone who's got tons of money does something, they might be a donor, so you're going to look the other way. If all you're driven by is ambition and you're not driven by a sense of right or wrong and the need to do justice and to protect unfamous people in the same way you should protect famous people, if that's what you are, then it's political. And that is what it has been for the longest time. And that, in my opinion, is how we became the most incarcerated country in the world, and how there has been such systemic inequality for poor people, for Black and brown people, and for people who have mental deficits, suffer from addiction, et cetera.
That's going to be my next question after this one, because this one I think is important. I think as a father of 4 children, like you said, you had access to video. I got to watch a video of the people in Minneapolis. I'm pretty sure it was. They broke down the gate. They 300 plus people. You could hear them making threats in the video, saying things. It might have been St. Louis, and they charged them. Right? They charged this woman and husband. I mean, should they have been charged in your eyes from what you see from the outside, like me? Because you might know more. But should they have been charged?
Lance, I don't want to answer that without thoroughly studying a video. I mean, for example, I've thoroughly studied some videos of what happened on 676 in Philadelphia during the protests. I have an opinion on that. I can talk about that. We've made decisions, but I don't want to jump out and do that without thoroughly studying those issues, because it is also fact specific, especially when you're talking about things like self-defense, which is the justification defense. It is so fact specific as to timing, as to location, who's moving towards whom. I mean, you used to wrestle, if I recall.
Yes.
Might have been in a fight once. We all know that it matters who steps to whom. We all know that it matters who swings or does something first, or where your eyes are. We all know that matters. And so I don't want to speculate on it, but I will say this: individual justice is hard. It means you got to look at 100 things in that video, think about it very carefully, talk to multiple witnesses, and you got to make a righteous decision based upon that. And you got to do it whether the public likes it or not. You're not there to just do what the public wants. You're there to do justice. So,
Do you think sometimes the prosecutor might appease the public in charge in some cases?
I think that we have a terrible history of the prosecutors, of prosecutors appeasing the public. I can tell you some pretty awful stories about, prosecutors and people running jails in the South at a certain time who would open the jail so the mob could take the defendant out and lynch him. And they would attend the lynching. I mean, yes, I think that there are a lot of times when prosecutors, police, and mayors, everyone else, make decisions that are purely political, and they're terrible decisions.
Terrible. That brings me to my next point, right? You said something like poor African Americans that get picked on, juveniles, and I have no problem ever saying this. I told you this from the day when I met you. Hey, Larry, full transparency. I got jammed up when I was younger. I was in a fist fight. I grew up in an orphanage group home. My mom came back, got us in and out of the foster care system. Like, the poor just get shit on. I hate to say that, like, they just do, right? The system, I mean, there's private prisons. How do you have private, that's a big hot point for me. Can you tell me how there's private, for-profit prisons? How does that work in America? Someone's profiting off of incarcerating the poor. Let's be honest, not too many rich people go to jail unless it's a major rape crime or something catastrophic, right?
Right. No, prison is where poor people go. There's no question.
Don't gotta tell me.
How do they? I know. How do they do that? I think it's immoral. I don't think it should be done. I think it came out of this idea, and I'm not saying the idea was always wrong, that we need to deregulate government, that private industry does things better than government. But the problem, of course, immediately became corrupt. So now you've got a county that has hired a private service to provide jails, and that private service is going to maximize profit for its shareholders. So they're going to try to cut down everything that they are allowed to cut down under the Constitution. And now they want to contract with the municipality or the county. The contract is keep my beds full. I'll open this facility if you keep my beds full. So what do we have now? We have a judiciary, we have prosecutors being pushed to put people in jail so that, the big gray hotel can be full so the people who own it can make money. That is corrupt. That is messed up. That's not a thing we should do at all in this country.
They literally put people in prison. They bully them. You go to a jury trial, we're going to double down on you, triple down on you.
Yeah.
When you should be able to have a trial without that. And then you go to prison and there's no literally education making people better. The CEO wants to make money. His job is to not get you out of prison. His job is to keep you in prison or get you recarcerated. I own a business. You've been to my office. I have 100+ employees. My job is to get clients and keep them. I want to make money. That's how the world goes round. Why would it be any different for someone that owns a prison?
It's not. And I'd like to tell you this problem is confined to private prisons, but it's not, because what happens when over 30, 40 years you become the most incarcerated country in the world is that you hire people, including good people, who want to do corrections officers' work. Well, they're now on a 25 to 30-year career track, right? And once you have a giant public prison system and you say, hey, we're tired of being the most incarcerated country in the world, there's a whole group of these folks who could be out of custody. We could put all that money back into schools, we could do Lance Bachmann's tech training for young people, right? It can be a pathway away from everything that we're trying to stop in terms of crime. But once you build this giant machine, which has all these people on 25, 30-year career tracks, and then they become unionized, and they have an interest in having all these prisons open and all these prisons full because it feels like job security, you have a problem when you try to change that footprint. You try to shrink the number of people who are in custody, do some more constructive things in the community because they feel like their jobs are threatened, right? They feel like they don't know what they do. If you started to reduce their power as a large union, they became a small union. So it's a real big problem. It's a problem fundamental to trying to change things.
Can I ask you a question? Because I don't think this will be your last stop as DA. I think you're going to wind up going on to do other things with your political career. If you were to become governor of the state of Pennsylvania, would you stop private prisons?
I highly doubt I'll do any of that, but yes.
You would?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can tell you this, you'd have my vote then, automatically. I think that's one of the most, I don't think I've ever said that on the show before, ever. I think it's the wrongest thing in America to have private prisons so CEOs can benefit from the pain of other people. Just think about that.
It's terrible.
How disgusting it is.
It's terrible. But, but make no mistake, there's a different form of profit here that's going on right now with public prisons, because Pennsylvania has fewer private prisons than most states. And that is that people who want to be governor sometimes get to be that and stay that because they fill state prisons. I'm not speaking of this particular governor, but I am saying historically, there have been governors in Pennsylvania, everywhere else, who
But
are
what's
all.
the why? Why would you want people in prison? Like this is one thing I said, right? Someone said to me, weed's legal now. There's people still sitting in prison for selling pot. I'm lost. Can you help me understand? I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy in the world. I don't understand.
I mean, I can give you the big picture. The big picture is we're coming out of a culture that has believed you're either rotten for your whole life or you're perfect for your whole life. It's this comic book view of the world. And so if we got you doing something bad once, you probably ought to remain in jail forever. That really is the comic book, and it's changed. I mean, it's changing now, Lance, but you go back to, I don't want to pick on particular politicians. You go back 30 years, you go back 20 years. We have had a culture that is, a lot of the politics are based on fear. A lot of it's based on fear of crime. A lot of it's based on a racist cartoon of fear of crime. And it's the same old story everywhere, not just America, everywhere else. You know, the people who are in charge are pretty busy telling us that the people who are not in charge are the problem. That's how they stay in charge. So if you're able to lock up tons of people and that makes voters feel safe, well, you basically took all these tax dollars to keep somebody in a jail cell and you turned them into your votes. And that particular political formula has worked really well for a long time. It is changing now. We are probably 10 years into a national movement of people who are feeling like you, that maybe there's too much incarceration, at least too much private incarceration is what I'm hearing from you, right?
I think it's too much incarceration. I think if you get into a fist fight, you shouldn't get a 5-year sentence. I think if you, it's your first offense, you shouldn't be bullied to take a plea for a felony or you're going to go to jail for 5 years. I don't think that's right. Does that make sense? I think
it does. I mean, what you're talking about is there should be some second chances. There should be some opportunities for people to have a bad day. If they haven't done too much harm, they should still have a good life. I would like to see, Lance Bachmann, who had some contact as a juvenile, I would like to see him dump tons of money in taxes into stuff that supports public schools. I think everybody would like to see this kind of mutual success. But when you make people felons very young, and then they can't get a job, support a family, pay taxes, what are you complaining about? That was a bad plan. You had somebody who was not a career criminal, someone who is not hell-bent on that, and you had to kick them that hard, and now you've hurt yourself. You've driven them towards crime. You've made them an expense as opposed to someone who's able to really contribute and support others.
Let's talk about that crime right now. You said to me you saw a spike in shootings in Philadelphia, and you saw a spike in homicides right now. And President Trump is saying he's already sent troops to other cities. He's saying he's going to come to our city. I know you have the tent down there around the art museum. Can you tell us kind of like what you're thinking? Do you want his help? Do you not want his help? Can you tell us what you're thinking? And then why crime's up, not crime's
sure.
up?
I will tell you what I'm thinking. So these are obviously really weird times. In my entire career, we've never seen a court system that's effectively shut down because criminal court in Philadelphia is effectively down. They only operate in a couple little ways for 3.5 months. It's such a crisis that the police commissioner had to make a decision when the pandemic was, it's still raging, but when it was raging the most, she had to make a decision only to arrest immediately on the most serious cases, right? So we're seeing all kinds of weird things going on. One of the interesting things that we saw was crime overall dropped a lot at first, but certain things went the other direction. Homicides went up, shootings went up, commercial burglaries went up 240%, 240%. There's reasons for that. When all the businesses are boarded up, when people aren't there to see you coming in the skylight, well, okay. And there's another reason for that. Tons of people were out of work. 40% of people who used to make $40,000 or less are unemployed, right? So you have financial desperation going on. So we've seen that. At the same time, we saw a reduction in burglaries of homes. Why? Because you don't want to go through the skylight when you know they're all home. I mean, that's just reality. That's kind of how this goes. So we've seen these sort of unusual effects.
Sexual assaults are also down in the city of Philadelphia. I saw that, rapes, stuff like that, correct also. So you're not getting a fair play right from the media, right? So you're getting, they're focused. I'm a fair person. I try and stay neutral. I've always said that when rapes are down, when burglaries are down, most violent crime is down, except for the shootings and the and the murders right now are up right now.
That is correct. Even though we have had a significant reduction in the number of people in jail in Philadelphia, we have in this year we're seeing a reduction in violent crime. Understanding that it does include in its numbers the shootings and homicides, but it also includes rapes, gunpoint robberies, fistfights, all that kind of thing. That's all within that category.
Why do you think the shootings and homicides are up? I just want your opinion. I'm going to give you my opinion. When you're done, yours. Why do you think this shooting?
Your opinion might be more interesting, but all right. Let me look. I spend a lot of time with police, and let me give you some of my ideas and their ideas. One of their ideas is there's fewer witnesses on the street. Another idea, which I think I share with them, is because you don't have a million places to go. If you really want to find somebody, sooner or later, they're going to come back to that house, the house that you already know how to find. And yeah, you can lurk in that bush or sit in that parked car outside that house for hours because there's no witnesses on the street. A third point, which I think is fundamental to what is driving a lot of the gun violence, is you have these groups of young people who are shooting each other. Sometimes they got different motives, but they're shooting each other. And these are people who in many ways don't have hope. Well, if you don't believe you're going to make it past 30, how worried are you about wearing a mask? How worried are you about leaving the house? These are people taking extreme risks. They're shooting back and forth, and they are unafraid to go out, to be out, to do whatever they were doing. If it was dealing drugs, if it was retaliating for what happened to their cousin, whatever it may be. So you're looking at a subgroup of extreme risk takers who do not believe they're going to live past 30. And while the rest of us are, boarding up and hunkering down at home, keeping our masks on, trying to keep safe, they're out and about and doing their thing. So I think that is probably also part of it. But the final point I want to make is, a lot of people are watching this huge effect on the economy. And, all of your viewers who are business owners, I'm sure, are having a very, very difficult time. And I wish them the best with this. But when you have that kind of a blow to the regular economy, it's also going to be a blow to illegal economies. It's going to cause disruption in things like, the illegal sale of drugs or something like that. Whenever there's disruption in an illegal market, you can't go to court and say, yo, judge, I sold this man a pound of weed, or, let's use a different substance. I sold this man a pound of some other drug and he owes me money. That's not what happens. You show up and you start fighting or shooting or stabbing. That's what you do. So to the extent you have a disturbance in the legitimate economy, it causes a disturbance in an illegitimate economy, and conflict means that you're going to have violence in a system that can't go to the courts.
I do agree with your third point 100%. Because when I was younger, I didn't think I'd see 30. I know my brothers didn't think they'd see 30. And I know they didn't even think about that when we were 15, 16. So I could see that. I thought one point you might have brought up is, do you think the police right now are afraid to get arrested, to do their job? Do you think because I know that's why I begged my son not to become a cop, because I was like, you could do the right thing totally. I'm going to give you an example. I felt where the cop was right. The Atlanta shooting where he got hit. And I know it's probably not the right thing to say. If someone shot a taser at me and things happen so fast, you're moving so quick, your mind's thinking, I know I would probably defend myself. Do you think police are afraid they're going to get charged if it happens in an instant? And they're going to get charged. Do you think that that's part of it?
No, I really don't. And we could talk about the case involving the taser. One of the things and I know quite a bit about him, one of the things that's interesting about that taser is it involves firing a couple pins that are attached to wires. And the wires are not all that long. So if you're 20 feet back from someone who turns around and pulls this yellow trigger, and then you have these little things that are supposed to stick in your skin and deliver an electric charge, and they're not even going to make it within several feet of you.
I don't know. All I know is I think it's easy to say that after the situation. Does that make sense?
Right.
I know if I'm running down the street, my adrenaline's going. I'm
right.
Like, I heard somebody say, couldn't you just let him go and not chase him, and you knew his stuff and go get him tomorrow? And I was like, I don't think any.
But look, there's no question that there are police officers who make poor decisions all the time who have not committed a crime. The nature of criminal justice is very different than civil justice. You make a mistake driving a car, you crash into another car, maybe you even kill two people. That does not mean you have committed a crime. But if you are driving that car 105 miles an hour in a 35 zone, with or without being drunk, if you are doing that, that's different. Okay. Yeah. And that's really the distinction here. So, our office reviews essentially every shooting in which police are involved on duty. We investigate it, and We have seen a ton of shootings where, number one, what the police officer did is righteous, not only legally appropriate, but heroic. We've seen other ones where the shooting was probably unnecessary, but it was an honest mistake and totally understandable. We don't charge those people with offenses.
Okay, that's good to hear. Because people don't have that opinion of you. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. People,
well, they don't know, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody, but
the media is so polarizing. That's the problem.
The media, I agree with you. The media really is polarizing. I will say one thing about criminal justice reform that I think is interesting. There's a lot of people who are very conservative, who are huge supporters of criminal justice reform because they believe that our prisons are a big waste of money, especially with no educational and no treatment aspect to them. And they're on the same page.
One of them.
Yep. Okay.
I'm one of them.
Well, so, I mean, I hold hands with people who are much more conservative than me all the time on that. You know, I am a big believer that you have to be careful how you spend your money in government. You can't just light it on fire. And that a lot of what is being done in the United States with jail is that. I mean, there are other countries, there are other places where when you go to any kind of an incarceration facility, they have people working. They have them taking language courses. They have them getting educations. They will even pay them to take the language course. They will pay them to work because the entire focus is on how do I get you out of crime and, as they put it, reintegrated into society so you can go from here to a job you can handle because you got the language, because you got the skills, because, you know, you've put away 50 cents so you can afford a down payment on an apartment and you're not going to immediately be running to the corner to try to make $2 so you can eat, right? There's just better ways to do stuff. And I think a lot of people who are very conservative understand that there's better ways to get us away from crime than this.
Do you want President Donald Trump help right now in our city or not? Because I've read a lot of different stories. Do you want his help, yes or no?
Well, no, because he's not trying to help. What he's actually doing is he's trying to promote his own election. Just take the most basic thing he said. The most basic thing he said is he described this country where you have the zombie invasion of protesters who he confuses with people who are looting, etc. He wants to convince the whole world that Philadelphia is nothing but people running up and down the street smashing windows. That's nonsense. We have had nothing but peaceful protests for weeks. There is no crisis on our streets whatsoever. Whatever might or might not be going on elsewhere, the truth is he's describing a crisis that doesn't exist. And he's describing that crisis so that he can get attention to this issue. Listen, you can say a lot of things about Trump, but he's real good at making you look over here when you should be looking over here. We should be looking over here at the fact that we have a pandemic that looks like it's headed back up. We have issues like you just raised with whether we're going to be able to reopen schools. We have terrible effects on the economy, a government spending money like it's never spent money before. And whether you think that's a good thing or not, that's a big issue. But instead, he's over here saying he's going to take over cities. Could you say something more controversial in a democracy than you, the president, are going to take over cities with federal forces or military forces? And then you look at what he's actually doing. It's none of that. He is talking about sending, 150 federal agents or troops or whatever. He's never specific to Chicago. Well, Chicago has 12,500 police. What he's actually talking about is sending 1% of their normal police force there. And he's talking about doing it in a place where a lot of things were going the right direction until a couple of months ago. This isn't real. This is kind of like when he said, I'm going to deport every immigrant in the United States. That wasn't real either. He doesn't have anything like the boots on the ground that will be required. The courts are not going to let him run amok and do things that are illegal. It is illegal to shoot a rubber bullet into the head of a peaceful protester, fracturing his skull, which happened in Portland. It is illegal to jump out of rented vans with anonymous, call the troops, call them feds, call them whatever they are, who are grabbing people off the street because of how they're dressed, not because they actually have probable cause for a commission of a crime. Those are crimes. You don't get to commit crimes just because you're the president, and you don't get to commit crimes just because you wear a uniform. I don't care whose uniform it is. So, in Philadelphia, I think we've been pretty clear how this goes. You go busting into stores when you're not supposed to be there, we're going to charge you. But we're also going to charge a police officer who is committing a crime. And we're going to do the same thing with feds. If you come here and you follow the law and the Constitution, that's fine. I work with feds all the time on very important investigations, even ones going on right now, and I'm happy to do it. I consider them colleagues. But the minute they want to walk out the front door and say, we're Vikings, we can do whatever we want, we can break skulls, we can kidnap people, I'm going to charge them because the law applies to everybody. Nobody gets a free pass here. So no, that kind of help we don't need. And when we look at Portland, where they fractured that skull and where they were dragging people off the street with no basis, what we see is they have now tear gassed the mayor, and that everybody in that city has said, you're making it more violent because you're provoking everything. We didn't want you here. We don't want you here. Go home. Why is he coming here when everything's peaceful now in terms of all the street activity, unrest, that sort of thing? Why is he saying he's coming here? He's saying he's coming here because his campaign is in bad shape, and he wants you looking over here. He wants you to look at fear, race, division, hate, when what you should be looking at is what's going on with this economy, what's going on with this pandemic.
I have a 6-year-old son, a 5-year-old son, and a 4-year-old son, and they look up to police officers, football players, wrestlers, you know, all these things. Nobody wants to grow up and be a prostitute. Nobody wants to grow up and be a drug addict. Nobody wants to be stuck on heroin, homeless. As you know how I grew up, you know, some of my brothers, what happened, you know, some of my friends, like, I say this to people all the time, and I see people bashing people on Facebook. They was the junkie loser. Nobody, it can happen to anyone's family. You got to have some compassion of nobody wants to grow up and have those problems. There's no black or white. And I think people don't realize that when it comes to the drugs, the prostitution. I don't think if you're a prostitute that you should have a criminal record. You're already at rock bottom. I mean, is that pretty much your argument?
Well, yeah, that is my argument. But my argument also is we have a public health system. Just take some money out of locking them up and put it into a public health system that will give them drug treatment, that will help them deal with the trauma of what many of them have been through. Just use this money more wisely, and we will have a better result. It doesn't make things better to take people who have addiction, stick them in a cage for a while, and then let them out with no treatment. The only thing that's going to happen is you're going to lower their resistance, and they might overdose quicker. I mean, honestly, I hate to be gloomy about this, but there's a lot of data to support that. So we have to see the humanity in all kinds of people. You know, there's nothing inconsistent with locking up people who do violent things and tear apart society for a long time. And on the other hand, saying this poor woman became addicted to because of her boyfriend, and now she is doing this thing on the street. We need to help her instead of making her unemployable with a criminal record.
Right, I'm with you. Guns, rape, violent offenses, repeat offenders over and over again. There's a place for you. It's called prison. But the rest, everything else has to be looked at and say, how do we make these people better? How do we make them part of society? How do we make them function? How do we get them into a trade school? How do we get them a job? And maybe I'm too much of a fairy tale guy, but know what? I lived a hell of a fairy tale from where I came from. And if I can do it, there's millions and millions of other people like me because there's nothing special about me. And that's where I just think the system's so broken. And I think that's where we actually connect, because I think our ideology is, well, I don't agree with everything that you do, which you know that, and you don't agree with everything about me, I'm sure, my views. But you do come from the right place. You just cannot slap people with records and destroy their lives.
I mean, look, there's some people who will be driven towards crime if they're given a break. There's some people who will be driven towards crime if they're not given a break. And it's very individual. It's hard to spot. I'm going to ask you a question because this is my show now. So my question for you is, so who lifted you up? Did you lift yourself up, or did somebody else?
My mom, my brothers, my sisters. And so mine, I mean, you know, I went to Glen Mills. I went away, got in Camp 2. I had such a supporting foundation. When we moved from the city, this sounds horrible. No one in the city ever helped me. We were so poor. We were shit on. We moved to Bucks County, moved to Council Rock. And the support system there was just totally different. I mean, yes, I got in more trouble, but even when I came out, my friend's dad, Seth Dunn, Mr. Wortman, they showed up me what a role model could be. People never gave up on me. And that's why I'm so loyal to Beat the Streets and other programs. They need people, men that are good men that can help young children out and show them a way. And my mom kept coming back. She kept fighting for me. My brothers, my sisters. I come from a very unique situation. Most people just don't have that and never get that break. Truthfully, Larry. Right. It was just a difference maker. And that's why I love my family so much. I'm so proud of saying I went to Council Rock and had some great teachers and some great people.
Right. Well, we have to find a way to replicate that. I mean, you grew up in an environment where one of the things I'm hearing you say is that there were people who had good jobs who were around you, and those jobs were not selling drugs on a street corner.
No,
You know, in Council Rock, not every parent was in jail, right?
no. When we
So,
moved here, it was the turning point for my whole entire. If you look at my brothers and sisters that grew up in the city, well, not my sisters as much, but my brothers, two are dead now. Drugs, OD'd. One died of cancer, but the drugs were a big factor of it. The other brother struggled. My younger ones that all went to Council Rock, principal, teachers, superintendents, me. It's just, I'm not saying Council Rock's the end all be all, but like you're saying, you have to change the environment, make things better, and get a supporting cast. And Philadelphia needs that more than ever. In prisons, you're not going to do that. It's not going to happen.
I hear it. We have to figure out a way so the good things that are going to happen in some of these well-funded suburban public schools in a neighborhood where there are adults who are not in jail and who have good jobs. So we have to find a way to replicate some of that in cities. And one of the biggest problems we have is that the public school funding is determined mostly by the local tax base. So if, you know, I went to high school, public high school, and actually grew up kind of broke in Chester County, Tradifferent Easttown, Conestoga High School, all that kind of stuff. And that was a blessing. There was a lot of stuff there. And it might have been very different if I had grown up in Philadelphia where they had half as much money per student. I mean, one thing I think we really should be doing is we should be nationally dumping exactly the same amount of money per student into each public school. And I think what you would see is an improved society.
Well, Larry, thank you for being on the Den. I appreciate it. And I wish you nothing but the best in your upcoming election and trying to do the best you can in such a crazy time, I'll use the words, and driving such a big ship. And I do hope you get the reform that I truly believe the system needs. And on my final note, I'm going to say to the viewers out there, the majority of the police out there are great people. There are some bad ones, and that's not making excuses for them. And I think Larry and Jim McNezzy, if you're watching this, if you sit down, Jim, and you do the right thing and you get the 2-3% of the bad ones out, you're going to see everything else go great. Because right now, a lot of people are looking down on some great individuals, and they should be raised up again and lifted up. And that's just my feeling. And Larry, I appreciate it so much for you being here, and thank you so much.
Great being here, Lance. See you soon. This is my lion's roar.
There you go.
That's what it is, right? A lion's roar.
Okay,
I would just say we got to hang in there. You know, we got to all roar together. Soon enough, we're going to be in a different place. And hopefully, even though we've all been disconnected, we'll be more connected than ever. We can get some of these things done.